begin. Oh, there we go, recordings. So good to see you, everyone. And let's begin with a little motivational meditation to begin with, as we've been doing. Relax your body, sit straight, get rid of those crinks in your neck and your back. And first of all, place your attention, your mindfulness on the respiration. I like to joke, be like a strict Swiss school teacher with a ruler in her hand that, or in his hand, that's going to smack you on the wrist if you don't do what they say. So here, let your attention focus strictly on your breathing. Let go of other thoughts and recognize when you're breathing in and breathing out. And to make it a little more difficult for your mind, try to count. This is the first inhalation, thinking something like that. Or you can imagine the number 1 in front of you. This is the first exhalation. And if you notice that your mind is a little calmer, bring your attention away from your breathing to your mental consciousness. One way of facilitating that is imagine taking an inhalation and imagining it going up your nostrils to the crown of your head, down to your heart chakra, sort of near the spine, a little in front of the spine at the level of your heart, so to speak, middle of your chest. And just watch the contents of your mental consciousness. Not following the thoughts, just noting them. And from the beginning, recognizing that any of the thoughts that arise emerge from the consciousness itself, like clouds forming on a day, April to May, say April showers bring May flowers. and begin to defocus on the objective thoughts within your mind, images, memories, emotional states, and focus more on the clear light nature of the mind from which they are emerging. It's not something that appears naturally to your mind. It is said to be an object of your wisdom eye and your gnosis eye, your exalted wisdom eye. You have to infer its existence, first of all. Let go of some partial attention to what your eyes are perceiving. Your mental consciousness is aware of that through conception, not your body consciousness. Let go of the sense of the solidity of your body. Let go of the sense of yourself as an observer, the I. That's just a concept to your mental consciousness. Try to perceive the spaciousness of the mind within which that appearance of the I is emerging. And even your mental image of this spaciousness of the mind is yet just that, a mental image emerging from the actual spaciousness of your mind. So even let go of that. Within that clear light state, recognize this is what is referred to as the conventional Buddha nature, not the actual Buddha nature, which would be the emptiness of the mind, its lack of inherent existence. Maybe like the developmental Buddha nature, within which facilitates the ability to develop good qualities within the spaciousness of your mind, and within which the emotional states, the klesha, the delusions, can be, first of all, reduced in intensity and eventually ceased, abandoned. The fact that we can recognize this is due right now to our having found a life of leisure and endowment, having planted seeds in previous lives to experience this through practice of virtue, especially morality and generosity and empathetic thoughts of prayers. Think that this is limited by my karma. I'll definitely die from this life. The mind will leave this, and the opportunity that we have right now will be eventually lost. So think, I'm going to use this opportunity now to take advantage, the great purpose, the great meaning of having found this life of leisure and endowment. I'm going to listen to this discourse, this class, participate in this class on Buddhist tenets to better understand the mind with the aim of using that understanding to develop good qualities, eliminate my bad qualities, bad faulty minds, states of mind, bad habits. Not simply that I can feel more comfortable, but with the eventual aim of opening my heart to others, to work for their welfare, first of all, just as much as I work for mine, and eventually working totally for the sake of others, to achieve Buddhahood for their sake. For it's only that state that can really guide others, eliminate their suffering, lead them into realizations that conquer their delusions spontaneously and effortlessly. I think I could make a motivation at the beginning. I'm going to participate this evening, or this afternoon, this morning, where you are, with the purpose of achieving enlightenment for the sake of others, all sentient beings. And bring your attention back to the present. How's it going? Any as we've done this meditation a couple of times, anyone have any thoughts or questions that have emerged over the weeks? What are we now in our fourth week, fifth week, something? Okay, no? A pair of glasses I've got on here. I got one pair of glasses for the computer, another for the reading, and because they're identical frames, I have to put them on to see which one I've got. Okay, so let's do a little formal prayer. So this is kind of a praise and request to Manjushri. The definitive Manjushri is the wisdom that realizes the ultimate nature of phenomena, epitomized by both the sword, which the wisdom that cuts through ignorance, darkness of ignorance, and the Prajnaparamita text, the text on the perfection of wisdom, which is on a utpala flower. It's kind of a blue lotus, which Manjushri is holding. Yeah, there we go. which Manjushri is holding in his left, the stem of which he's holding in his left hand. Some versions of Manjushri, Manjushri is holding the text within his fingertips, but this red, yellow, orange Manjushri, this particular version is holding the upala flower that blooms next to his ear. So the words, homage to my Lama and protector, Venerable Manjushri, who holds at his heart a scripture symbolic of seeing all as it is, whose pure genius shines like a sun unclouded by the two obscurations, who with compassion like a father for his only child teaches with 60-fold eloquence all beings imprisoned in cyclic existence, groping in the darkness of ignorance and overwhelmed by suffering. You whose thunder-like proclamation of the perfection of wisdom arouses us from the stupor of our afflictions and frees us from the iron chains of karma, who wields wisdom's sword, vanquishing the darkness of ignorance, hewing down our every sprout of suffering. You who are primordially pure, who have finished the 10 grounds, the complete embodiment of every excellence, whose princely body is graced with the 112 adornments, O Manjushri, to you I bow, dispel the darkness of my mind. And as before, we will recite the mantra 21 times, the Om Arapatsanadi, and then the last syllable D, we imagine on a mundisk at the tip of our tongue, and after having recited the mantra 21 times, take a deep breath, and without losing all of that air, on one breath, recite the seed syllable D 108 times, if you can. Om Arabazanari, 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 Om Arabazanari. Om Arabazanari, Om Arabazanari, Om Arabazanari, Om Arabazanari, Om Arabazanari. Om Arabazanari, Om Arabazanari, Om Arabazanari, Om Arabazanari, Om Arabazanari. Om Imagine swallowing with the saliva that syllable D that comes down to your heart, and the blessings of quick wisdom absorb into your mental consciousness. Okay, thank you. I count 108 this way. I say, one of the Ds, I have, rather than going one for each bead on the mala, I try to say 4 Ds. I've got a little placeholder at 21. So I say D, 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 D. So when you get to 21, you haven't quite got 108. So I say another, I think 20, what is it, 4 times 27 should be close. So I say another, with fingers to finish up. Anyone know what the 2 obscurations are in that prayer? It mentions eliminate the 2 obscurations from my mind. Tenzin Jangju, do you know? He's thinking.
No, the 2 one obscuration is obscurations to knowledge, and the obscurations to wisdom, I think, maybe.
Maybe. So usually we call them the
Kleshas.
the afflictive emotions, yeah, the klesha avarana. Avarana means obstruction in Sanskrit. So or nyun, nyun dip, so nyun mongi dipa in Tibetan means the afflictive obscurations that prevent you from freeing yourself from cyclic existence. They're the main obstacles to nirvana. And the second obscuration is called the shedip, which means the obscurations to knowing all phenomena. So those are the two obscurations. What about the 112 adornments? Jeremy, do you know what those are? No. Okay, that's good. That's honest.
It's sorry, I was trying to find my screen.
Yeah.
Aren't they the adornments of the Buddha? I mean,
So
signs.
112, do you hear that very often, 112 adornments? Usually we say what it's referring to is the 32 major marks of the Buddha, having long ears and compassionate eyes and copper like fingernails and toenails, and the chakras on his palms and the soles of his feet and so forth. What are called the 32 major marks. And then there are 80 subsidiary marks, which some translate as exemplifications or something, minor marks. So 80 plus 32 is what? 112, right?
112.
So that's where that comes from. I'll try to, when you're talking about understanding the meaning of the prayer. So we are talking about the schools of Buddhist tenets from the Gelugpa point of view, which I'll mention a little bit, especially today. We've already talked about the first of the lesser vehicle tenet schools, the Vaibhashika, which basically there were 18 different schools that had slightly different interpretations. We talked a little bit about that. And their tenets. Now we're in the nearing the end or in the middle of the Sautrantika school, which are the followers of Sutra, so-called because unlike the Vaibhashikas, they say that the Abhidharma, remember the three baskets of the teachings, the Vinaya Pitaka, the basket of teachings on discipline, the Sutra Pitaka, which is essentially the basket of teachings on concentration, and the Abhidharma Pitaka, which is the basket, the basket of teachings on higher wisdom. The Sautrantikas say that the Buddha taught higher wisdom in many of his discourses, and that the 7 texts that were enshrined in the Pali Canon were all written by seeming arhats, but they had mistakes. They weren't the actual Buddha, so they don't rely on that. So they rely on the sutras, the general discourses of the Buddha. So we talked about the definition of Sautrantika, and then we made the distinction of the followers of scripture and the followers of reasoning. So the followers of scripture still had a lot of their viewpoints similar to the Vaibhashikas, because they depended on the text written by Vasubandhu, which was talking about the Vaibhashika system, but from the point of view of the Sautrantika. So remember, he would, in that text, they would depend on that text because there were some, when the Sautrantikas disagreed with Vaibhashikas, the sentence would end with a syllable that indicated kind of like, so they say, like nudge, nudge, like it's not really that way, but that's what they say. The followers of reasoning were the followers of Dharmakirti, the 7 treatises on logic written by Dharmakirti. His guru was Dignaga. They were actually intimately related with Vasubandhu. I don't remember off the top of my head now whether it was Dharmakirti or Dignaga who was the actual disciple of Vasubandhu. Bob, do you know?
It was Dignaga.
Dignaga himself. So Vasubandhu had many students who, I think, like for instance, one of his students named Sthirmati became even more expert in Abhidharma than Vasubandhu, and Dignaga was his preeminent student, became more expert in logic and so forth. So they're kind of contemporary, and the followers of reasoning, Dignaga's and Dharmakirti's texts melded Sautrantika tenets and sometimes elaborations of that from the Mahayana point of view, the Chittamatra, but mainly the followers of Dharmakirti, the followers of reasoning, were those that were more, that took the sections of Dharmakirti's texts from the Sautrantika point of view. We talked about the main way here that objects are divided is into conventional existence. Anything that exists is either a conventional truth or an ultimate truth. Ultimate truths are things that are ultimately able to perform a function, meaning that you had an ultimate mind, which means a perception. So it's synonymous with impermanent things that you can perceive with your senses. Conventional truths are, from the Sautrantika point of view, are things that are not ultimately able to perform a function. They're totally mentally imputed, only known by the conceptual mind. They're permanent. We say that conventional truths are falsely established. And we talked about negative and positive phenomena, which comes up much more in higher tenets. Here they talk about a negative phenomena is an object realized by an awareness apprehending it by way of eliminating its object of negation. And a positive phenomena is an object realized by an awareness apprehending it not by eliminating anything else, but just by directly perceiving it. There are non-affirming negatives and affirming negatives or negations, which is different than the Vaibhashika, which said they didn't talk about non-affirming negations. Every negation was an affirming negation. Around this point, we were talking about single phenomena and different phenomena. Single, here, this particular translation, you could say one phenomena are either, the dividing up the pizza of all phenomena into things that are one and things that are different. Different means things that are diverse, like, for instance, pillar and pot. There's not one thing called pillar and pot. Those two things are different, right? And I think this is not sure if we got much further than this last time. Here there's a distinction made into false singles and true singles. This is more or less where we got last time, right? So here is a little bit interesting. This particular, especially the illustrations here are kind of like the Gelugpa take on this, because generally, let's see, the examples that are given, the illustrations. The illustrations of false single is object of knowledge, and another example is generally characterized phenomena. Do you remember what those two terms meant, or what generally characterized phenomena meant, and specifically characterized phenomena? You remember what those are? Specifically characterized phenomena are phenomena that are impermanent, that are perceived by the senses, actually, kind of out there. Generally characterized phenomena are phenomena that are imputed by the mind, that are not actual objects of the senses. And according to these tenets, these kinds of phenomena that are imputed by the mind are necessarily permanent. And so they are said to be falsely existent, as we said before. We say conventional truths are falsely existent, falsely established, generally characterized phenomena. They're all equivalent. So here, the two examples of a false single is object of knowledge, two examples, one object of knowledge. So object of knowledge, is that itself a conventional truth or an ultimate truth? Okay, I have to think for a second. Bob, what do you think?
Well, this is where I get confused by the terminology, because sometimes object of knowledge means the actual objects themselves. But I think the reason why this is permanent is because it is composed of both impermanent and permanent objects. They're both permanent and impermanent objects of knowledge. And so when you mix the two, it's considered to be permanent.
Yeah, according to the Gelugpa position on this. So here, this is a subtle point. Object of knowledge is kind of like a general set, right? It's what's called a universal or a generality, so we talk about generalities like cars. So there are different kinds of cars, right? There's particulars of cars. Audi, or around here, they're all Subarus, Chevrolets, different particulars of a generality. According to Dharmakirti's system, originally, generalities were generally established phenomena, so they were permanent. Even the Sakyas that different than the Gelugpa tradition, right? They would say that generalities were permanent. But according to Lama Tsongkhapa's tradition, there was sort of like a change of that, and general things could be, generalities could be themselves impermanent. So for instance, in this case, object, as Bob said, object of knowledge or objects of knowledge is a generality, and it includes everything that exists. So included in the existence are permanent things and impermanent things. Let's say generally we put it the other way: impermanent things and objects of knowledge, and permanent objects of knowledge. So if a generality includes both, it is said to, you take preference to the permanent things. And so you would say it's falsely, the generality is falsely existent because it includes some things that are falsely existent, mainly impermanent objects of knowledge. Makes sense? How about generally characterized phenomena? That's even more easy. Generally characterized phenomena, again, is a generality or a universal set. that has particulars. All of those particulars are generally characterized. That is, they are permanent. They are merely imputed. They're imputed by the mind. So that one is definitely also a false single. Even though it's a generality, it's considered single because it's just one name, one thing, right? Then true singles, examples of true singles are thing and impermanent phenomena. When it says impermanent phenomenon, I'm not sure if you have to say phenomenon. I think the generality, again, thing is a generality, right? Is a universal set, and it has particulars. My air purifier, my iPad, my mug, they are all things. They are all particulars of the generality or universal. Where are we here? Thing. The Tibetan word is ngopo. I think Sanskrit is bhava. So remember, this was one of the synonyms of impermanent phenomena. When we talked about ultimate truth, so we said ultimate truth, truly established thing. In other words, it's sometimes translated as functional thing. Something which is able to perform a function is a thing. Product and permanent phenomena, compounded phenomena, substance and specifically characterized phenomena are all synonyms, all synonymous. They are mutually inclusive. So here, thing is a universal, a generality, but all of its elements are impermanent. So therefore, it is a true single, even though it's something that includes many elements, many particulars. The universal itself is considered one. And then what's the other one here? Impermanent phenomenon, or impermanent phenomena, because it includes many particulars. That's a generality or universal. All of its elements, all of its particulars are impermanent. So therefore, specifically characterized and truly existent, truly established, their ultimate truths. Does that help? Anyone have a question about that? So I wanted to mention in this context another book for those. I think Bob is familiar with this because I think he mentioned this before, by one of my old friends, George Dreyfus. When I first became a monk, George Dreyfus had been a monk for a couple of years. I think he was born in Switzerland. Very smart guy, came from a wealthy, intelligent, I think his father was a professor. And he became a monk, he told me, so that he could study Buddhist philosophy, with the actual lamas in the monastery, as opposed to a layperson. His heart wasn't completely into becoming a monk, but he was a monk, and he became a Geshe. I think the first Western Geshe, if I recall. I remember sitting with him when he was a monk, and later years when he became a professor, is married, has kids and everything. Quite eccentric guy, but very brilliant. This is a very good book, Recognizing Reality. So I'm going to read you just a little segment from this on generalities. So this is he's exploring the difference between the Gelugpa presentation and the Dharmakirti explanation originally, because all of this is coming from Dharmakirti's 7 treatises on logic. So it says in standard Gelugpa exegesis, or it says Geluk exegesis, the generally characterized, remember, generally characterized phenomena, remember that's those are conventional truths, right? According to this Sautrantika system. The generally characterized is defined in opposition to the specifically characterized as, quote, that which is not established as specifically characterized, but is merely imputed by thought and language. Merely imputed by thought and language. It doesn't have any real, you can't actually see it with your eyes. So, although you do see instances of objects of knowledge, you do see, instances of that. You don't see those instances, those particulars which are generally characterized. In the same way that the impermanent and the specifically characterized are said to be equivalent, the permanent and generally characterized are also equivalent or synonymous or mutually inclusive. Permanent phenomena include items found in the Abhidharma, such as space and cessation, and also phenomena such as existence, common locus, or reasons. For all of these phenomena lack causal reality and have therefore no mode of existence other than that constructed by conceptions and linguistic activities. So this is kind of the original meaning of generally characterized phenomena. And that would include universals, For them, in general, those would be called generally characterized phenomena. So I won't read any more of this because I think some of you are probably, say, what did someone say? Yeah, over my head. So, but if you want, you can look in this section, if you happen to have this book, get it from the library, on page 119, Nominal Existence and Existence, and investigate a little bit more about that. That's enough about that. So there are two types of different phenomena. False difference, example of different means something where you say a word, you say some words, and that is indicating things that are different, like house and car, home and garden. This is a magazine, right? Or pillar and pot. So there are two types: false difference and true difference. So again, the example of a false different is the pair isolate of pot and isolate of pillar. Did we talk about this before? Isolate? Karen, do you remember? Did we talk about isolate? I think you're not sure if you're saying no. Doris says we have. Okay. Kevin put up thumb. Apparently that means that he remembers talking about isolate. So isolates are generally characterized phenomena. They're mere imputations of the mind. They are identified as kind of like say if you talk about the isolate of pot or the isolate of cow, one of the classic examples is cow. How does mind think about cow? How does the mental image of cow arise? It arises by, first of all, imagining a set of everything other than cow, or everything other than vase. Like everything other than vase would be bumba means vase, mayimba means not vase. And then taking the reversing from that, taking the negative of that, the opposite of that, that brings you back to vase or cow. So it's a kind of exclusionary process where you come back, you isolate the object in question by first reversing from or taking the opposite of everything that it's not. Does that make sense? You have to think about it for a while. Roanna, no?
This is another one of these things where poor Don had to beat me over the head when we went through this.
Where's the scars? I don't see any scars there. Okay, there it is.
Quite a few. It's because when I visualize something, you say something, I usually dial in something very close. I don't know of anything else around, and it might be a perceptual flaw in my mind. I think of the last item that met that criteria in my mind. Boom.
Right. So this is not talking about a conscious effort on our part that if we think about vase, first we think about everything that's other than vase and then take the reverse of that. It is exemplifying according to Dharmakirti and according to the logicians that came afterwards, the process, the actual reality of the mental image that we generate.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, conceptual mind is different than perceptual mind, right? Perception is something that we perceive, well, according to these tenets, only
Just
in
directly,
permanent
yeah,
phenomena,
right on.
right? So you don't need any kind of mental image. Although functional things, you know, my iPhone and so forth, I can also think about that. In fact, any kind of emotional, you know, my attachment to my iPhone is due to my mental consciousness. The eye consciousness does not have attachment. You know, if you see a scratch on your car, or someone has, what's the word, keyed your car, or, you know, bumped into it, and there's an emotional reaction, that's not due to your eye consciousness seeing that dent or that scratch on your car. It's due to your mental consciousness, which also knows the car by means of a mental image of car. That mental image of car is said to be the opposite of non-car. So it is a generally characterized, it's a universal, first of all. Remember I said before, universals could be permanent or impermanent, but here it is a generally characterized phenomena. The mental image is something which is permanent, doesn't change from moment to moment. So when we talk about false difference, isolate of pot and isolate of pillar. So the isolate of a pot would be the opposite of a non-pot. That's considered to be a generally characterized phenomena, so falsely existent. And the other element of this is isolate of pillar. Isolate of pillar is also, although a pillar is an impermanent phenomena, specifically characterized, the isolate of pillar is essentially equivalent to the mental image of pillar, and that is a permanent phenomena. So that pair, both of them are false. That is, they're falsely existent. So that's given as illustration of a false different. We say false difference with an S in the end, I'm not sure. Then the example, there's another division, true difference. So a true different is the pair pot and pillar. So a pot is truly established because it's a conventional truth, because it's an ultimate truth. And a pillar is truly established because it's a specifically characterized phenomenon, it's a thing. And therefore that pair is said to be a true different. So you might,
George, I believe Doris has a question for us.
Okay.
to interrupt.
Yeah, no, that's good. I didn't see Doris. Okay, Doris, did you raise your hand? I'm sorry, I didn't see.
Well, actually, my question is, I'm stuck from last week, actually, on the use of true and false.
So here, apparently it's referring to in the Sautrantika system, things which are impermanent, which are, we could call specifically characterized. They have their own specific characteristics, all of which appear to a sense consciousness. Like, say, for instance, the specific characteristics of my heater, its shape and color, its sound, because when it's on, it sometimes clanks, and one of these electric heaters that has oil inside might even smell sometimes. All of its specific characteristics appear to sense consciousness, and it is therefore considered, because it's perceived by the ultimate consciousness, that is the sense consciousnesses. They're said to be ultimate consciousnesses. They're said to be ultimate truths and true. Things that are perceived by the mental consciousness are called generally characterized phenomena. You know them via their mental image with your mental consciousness. So to that mental consciousness, not all of the specific characteristics of that is appearing to your mental consciousness. Only the general characteristic of its general category, car or so forth. So those are, because they are perceived by a consciousness which is not ideal, which is not an ultimate consciousness. Ultimate consciousnesses are only those things that perceive the impermanent things. These are said to be falsely existent. Now, the upper tenets, Prajnanika and so forth, would not agree with that, but this is the Sautrantika system. Let me read, in that regard, let me read you a little section here from this book. Do you know this book? Did some of you study Lorig, Mind and Awareness, maybe with Don? You might have had this as a sub. This is Mind in Tibetan Buddhism. Lectures by Lati Rinpoche, also Demolocho Rinpoche. I'm not sure why they don't put his name on here also, but mainly Lati Rinpoche and Elizabeth Napper, who was once married to Jeffrey Hopkins. She was one of his first students. In fact, I mentioned yesterday in the class for the people in New York City, I'd gone on a trip just after they were married. I was in Tibet, and they were in Tibet. We were on the same bus going to Lhasa, where we saw the Panchen Lama. So Liz Napper is a very good scholar, and in recent years has become an advocate of women's rights, especially in academia, because at one point she was turned down for a chair at, what was it, Bob? Harvard? Maybe some of you know, mainly because there were some guys that were not as qualified as her, but because she was a woman. Anyway, so in here on page 35, in the introduction, it says, it's making a distinction between perceptual mind and conceptual mind. Perceptual minds are also called collective engagers because they engage a collection of the specific characteristics of something. And conceptual minds are called eliminative engagers. They engage their object by eliminating other things, like we say, the opposite of non-pot, right? So here it says, so there's a primacy, especially in the Sautrantika, well, all the way along, in direct perception. Direct perception, because it engages all of the facets of the phenomena, is said to be more powerful, sort of ultimate mind, whereas conceptual mind, because it only engages phenomena by their general characteristics, not all of the specific characteristics. They engage them by eliminating other things. They're not considered as important. But left just as it is, direct perception would not naturally improve However, careful use of thought, conception, such as training in the process of reasoning, can gradually bring direct perception to full potential in Buddhahood. At such a time, thought is no longer necessary, but prior to that point, there is no way of progressing without the use of thought, or we say conception here. So it's not as though conceptual mind, you shouldn't worry about reasoning or thought processes, because to bring to culmination the direct perception of the mind, mental consciousness, you need to use thought. Generally, we say if you're going to realize emptiness or selflessness, that's an object of mental consciousness. It's not selflessness or emptiness. It's not something which is perceived by the senses until you're a Buddha. The Buddha's senses perceive, all of his mind perceives everything, but other than that, only the mental consciousness perceives selflessness and emptiness. So the mental consciousness is dealing with, at first, although it can be trained according to the Mahayana, it can be trained to have a direct perception of emptiness. The only way that it can get to that direct perception is by means of conception, by thought, by reasoning and logic. You develop a mental image of emptiness, and according to the Mahayana, by familiarity with that again and again, and logical analysis, the union of calm abiding and penetrative insight, eventually that mental image becomes more and more transparent. Sometimes kind of like the old, in the harem, the king's queen would have on many, many veils. So even you took off one veil, you couldn't see her face. You had to take off another. Finally, taking off all of these different veils of mental image of emptiness, you have the ability to develop a direct perception of emptiness. So especially for the Mahayana, we wouldn't denigrate conception, because conception can realize something, even though it is a limitative engager. It's only recognizing, it's not directly perceiving all of the characteristics of something, whereas by the process of reasoning and familiarity, that mental image can be erased or eliminated, so that your mental consciousness then engages with emptiness directly. I thought that quote struck out for me, and I thought that was worth sharing with you. Okay, so does that help? Who was asking about that? Yeah, does that help, Doris?
That was perfect. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. I don't know, but anyway, okay, helpful.
Well, I followed it, so I'm calling it perfect.
Okay, I'll go along with that. Okay, so let's go a little bit further. On page 10, past and future are both permanent. Present and thing are equivalent. So I'll talk a little bit more about this next week. Remember, according to the Vaibhashika, when we talked about the past, the present, and the future of things, they all existed now. So even now, the past of of my pen, would say the pen of yesterday, it might have been less abused. Maybe it's got a scratch on it now, or different lead in it or something. It's different than it was yesterday, right? The pen of yesterday, according to Vaibhashika, exists now, and the future of this pen right now, also exists now. Here, the Sautrantika says the past and future are both permanent, and the present thing, the present and the thing are synonymous. Okay, so I'll talk a little. Yeah, go on, Bob.
Yeah, in this regard, I mean, I find the language a little bit different than the way we use it in English. Because in English, we talk about past and future. It's just sort of general time periods or whatever. Whereas this always seems to refer to specific objects, the past of a specific object, the present of a specific object, or the future of a specific object. Is that true?
So I may be wrong, but and I'll check a little bit more. But in general, I think all of these schools exist, say that there is a past. You can talk about the past. The Buddha talked about in the past, many eons ago, I was born as a Brahmin boy or this or that, and Devadatta was doing this and so forth, their previous lives. And we do talk about the future. The Buddha, even in the sutras, talked about, due to this act of giving, in the future, you will be born as the Pratika Buddha named so-and-so in this world system and have this many disciples and so forth. So it is understood that past and future in general, but here we're talking about when we talk about the past of a particular thing, like say the past of the Buddha, for the Vaibhashika, the past of the Buddha still exists. Okay, for the Sautrantika here, it says the past and the future are both permanent, whereas the present is impermanent. It's something that's existing right now. So we'll go into a little bit more detail before we finish Sautrantika next session. So let me go on now to the ways that they assert subjects. Remember, we talk about subjects and objects. Subjects, the actual literal word in Tibetan is object possessor. So that's how the translator translated it here, reflecting the construction in Tibetan. You could say way of asserting subjects. So remember, there are different kinds of subjects. There are consciousnesses are subjects because they have objects of consciousness, right? Persons are subjects because they have consciousness, and the consciousnesses have objects, and you could say that, what can I see here? That Kevin is a subject because he has a mandala, set of mandala rings. He's in the lower right-hand corner, at least on my screen. Is it the same? Everyone see the same screen? I'm not sure. He has a car maybe, or he has a computer. And then also what are called articulate sounds are subjects because they have objects in that they denote a particular object. Those are kind of three kinds of subjects: persons, consciousness, and articulate sounds. So here it says, there are two assertions among the proponents of sutra, or the Sautrantikas. As I said before, the Sautrantika doesn't have the word proponent in it. This is how they chose to translate it. Maybe you say followers of sutra, or the Sautrantikas. Some assert the continuum of the aggregates to be an illustration of the person. those people that say the continuum of the aggregates are more the followers of Vasubandhu's Abhidharmakosha, the followers of scripture. Other Sautranticas assert the mental consciousness to be an illustration of the person, and that those are the followers of reasoning, the followers of the 7 treatises on valid cognition, maybe the sharper ones. Again, I'll go over some of this in more detail next time. Then so that's talking about persons, right? When we talk about subjects, remember I said persons, consciousness, and articulate sounds. So now it's talking about subjects of consciousness. So the definition of an awareness, that means the consciousness, right, is that which is clear and knowing. So this is we say, Lo Seni Shel Sing Sel Shing Rikpa. Shel means clear, Rikpa means knowing, Dang means and. So that which is clear and knowing. This is a famous definition that the sophistication of it, the understanding of it, can be elaborated in much detail. What is meant by clear and what is meant by knowing. So although a crystal paperweight, I don't have a crystal paperweight, but you can imagine a crystal paperweight is clear, it's not the same clarity that's referred to, although it is clear. You know, you can see things through it, or the lenses of my eyeglasses are clear. They're not the same clear or clarity that's referred to in the definition. The kind of definition of clarity has to do with our meditation at the beginning, our meditation on the Mahamudra, where we try to see the clear light nature of the mind. It's not as though it has a particular color. It's referring to the fact, on one level of meaning, it refers to the fact that the consciousness does not obstruct conceptual thoughts from emerging from it, arising, or does not obstruct their diminishment, their disappearing. That's a very important fact. It can give you encouragement when you feel like, oh, I'm dumb, I can't figure this out. Just to realize that your mind has the capacity. I remember when I was first, I think before I was a monk, and I was talking to Alan Wallace. Maybe some of you know Alan Wallace, know of him. Recent years, a translator, and started this organization that has meditation retreats to develop tranquil abiding, single pointed concentration. Does anyone know Alan Wallace? Maybe one or two people. Yeah. I think one of his centers now is in Colorado. Anyway, Alan Wallace was a translator, a monk of Geshe Rapton's, and a translator for many years, wrote many books, and has a degree in physics, I think, from Stanford, after he was a monk. Anyway, Alan, I remember, had a very clear understanding of the mind and its function, and I was, especially about what constituted, a self-supporting, substantially existent person, and all of these different things. And I bemoaned the fact that I didn't understand. I never would understand it as well as he. And he said, "Don't worry, just get familiar with it. You'll understand." I remember that. And it's sort of like knowing that clear light nature of the mind through familiarity, things that now seem like, oh, I'll never understand that. That's beyond me. None of that is true. You can understand these things because you have this clear light nature of the mind. The mind also, besides having its nature as being clear, it also has the function of knowing, cognizing, understanding that which is before it. not just the mental consciousness, also the sense consciousnesses. They're all clear and knowing. It's a general definition of awareness. So here, the way this is delineated is has a particular purpose. I would generally just define from here. I would talk about perceptual mind and conceptual mind and so forth. But Jason Chuki Gelson, the author of our Sarah J text here, starts by giving a very specific kind of awareness. You could divide awarenesses or consciousnesses into two: valid cognizers and non-valid cognizers. Okay, so valid cognizers would be called pramana. Do you know the Tibetan for pramana? Anyone? Bob, do you know? Sema. It's just the word, although pramana can refer to persons, it can refer to consciousness, and it can refer to even articulate sounds. Pramana generally is translated here as valid cognizer. So it means a particular kind of awareness that has realized the object, gotten to its action, eliminated all superimpositions about it, even if it's intellectual. But it has another characteristic in this system. It has to be fresh. Remember, we also talked about it in Vaibhashika. A valid cognizer here is defined as a new, that means fresh, incontrovertible knower. So incontrovertible, you could translate other ways. You could say as undeceived. There are two kinds of mistakes you can make with the mind. You can have a mistaken mind, or you can have a controvertible or incontrovertible mind. The two kinds of errors are different. Mistaken or unmistaken refers to the appearing object. The word mistaken in Tibetan, it's trua. I don't know in Sanskrit. Incontrovertible is not talking about the appearing object, that which appears to the consciousness. Like, say, for instance, conceptual consciousness. What's its appearing object? Does a vase appear to the thought thinking vase? No, the mental image of vase appears. The mental image of vase is permanent, right? The meaning generality of vase. So that the conceptual consciousness is mistaken with regard to its appearing object, but it can be incontrovertible. It can actually realize vase, eliminate all the superimpositions or wrong ideas about vase. So here, the definition of a valid cognizer is a new incontrovertible knower. In outlining the definition of valid cognizer, it is necessary to mention the three, according to this interpretation. Maybe you don't have to say all three. New, incontrovertible, and knower. You have to have all three elements to have this definition to be precise, according to the Sautrantika, because new eliminates subsequent moments of cognition. Say, for instance, when I perceive something, a train of visual consciousness, only the first instant of that train of visual consciousness, till I blink or until I, turn my head and look again, one train, a continuum of visual consciousness. I'm looking out my window now, I see a tree outside, and then if I close my eyes and I look again, there'll be a new train of visual consciousness. You know what I mean by train? Continuum. One moment after the other. Only for the Sautrantikas here and for the Vaibhashikas, only the first moment of that train of consciousness, continuum of consciousness, is pramana, is valid, because it's like the example I gave before, like the engine of a bunch of cars, a train, a diesel locomotive. So man, don't consider the case where there's also a locomotive at the end also that has power. Only this train, one of the old trains, is only being drawn by the first, the engine, right? The subsequent cars also continue to move, but they don't move by their own power. They're drawn or induced by that first car. So in the same way, those that, the lower tenets here, that require that something that is a valid cognition to be new or fresh, kind of like in that analogy, the subsequent moments of a train of consciousness no longer have the same validity as the first one, which has realized it freshly by its own power. Babo. Can I call you Babo? Is that okay?
Yeah, to me, this terminology seems very strange because, you only have two types of mind, valid and invalid. So the first moment you get it, you're correctly getting the object correctly, so it's valid. And now all the subsequent ones that follow along by definition have to be invalid, but they actually are correctly realizing the object, maybe because of the first one, but still it seems odd to call them invalid when they actually are correctly understanding the object.
Right. So here there's a difference between a realizing consciousness and a valid consciousness. Just as Bob said, realizing consciousness, all of that train of, let's say, a visual perception of the tree, all of that train realizes the tree. But only the first moment of it is called valid according to the Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas. Later, in the Mahayana, the etymology of pramana is taken differently. Pramana, mana means mind. One of the Sanskrit words for mind. There are various words for different kinds of consciousness. Generally, for Prasangika, all of them are synonymous, but they have slightly different variations. So pramana, mana means mind. Pra is taken here as meaning, well, what we say, when we say prime in English, like a prime steak or something, it usually means fresh, new, best. So they take it as meaning something which is fresh or new. That is the lower tenets, Vaibhashika and Sautrantika. The upper tenets, the Mahayana, generally takes the pra of pramana to mean realizing, to be, so even the subsequent moments, the subsequent moments are also can be pramana if the first moment has realized the object. So here, we're just talking about the Sautrantika, so a new incontrovertible knower. So new eliminates subsequent cognizers as being valid cognizers. Incontrovertible eliminates various things. It eliminates correct assumptions being valid cognizers. And knower eliminates, remember here, incontrovertible doesn't mean mistaken. Remember, a conceptual consciousness is mistaken, so it's mistaken with respect to its appearing object. It doesn't actually a vase doesn't actually appear, only the mental image of vase, but it still can be incontrovertible in that it knows the vase. The first moment of it could be called prime cognition or valid cognition. Incontrovertible eliminates correct assumptions from being valid cognizers. So what does that mean? Correct assumptions. Who here believes in reincarnation? Okay, only 4, 5. Okay, if I took a poll. So Yarpel, you don't believe in reincarnation? Okay, you do, okay. But probably many of us might say, oh yeah, I believe. In fact, almost assuredly, if you have like, really confident, I'm a Buddhist, I am a Gelugpa or whatever, you would say, you might not say, would you say you realized it? I don't know. Generally, what we have is what would be called a correct assumption that reincarnation exists. We have a belief, you could call it correct belief. We have a belief that it exists, which happens to be correct from a point of view of someone who actually has a clairvoyance, who actually can see past and future lives. But we haven't actually realized it. So that particular correct assumption is not incontrovertible. It hasn't eliminated all of the superimpositions of our mind so that we've actually realized it. So we'll talk about correct assumption here in a little while. So, and then it says, and the word knower, when you say a new incontrovertible knower, that's necessary. That eliminates the physical sense powers being valid cognizers. Well, generally, the only people that accept that the sense powers know their objects are the Vaibhashikas. Remember, usually the sense power is material, subtle matter. Let's say in the eye consciousness, the sense of the eye sense power is not the eyeball. It's not necessarily the retina. It's not just the cones and rods in the retina, but it's some subtle matter within them, which act as an interface between eye consciousness and the image that is projected on the retina. Okay, so according to the Vaibhashikas, they would say that even the sense powers know the object, and the word knower is added here in the Sautrantic presentation to eliminate that. This is not the only way of dividing consciousness, awareness, into valid and invalid, or non-valid. That's what I said. You could have started it into talking about cutting the pizza of consciousness into conceptual and non-conceptual, or many other ways. So you might get the mistaken impression here that everything, you have to start from this point. You can start from different points. There are two types of valid cognizers: direct valid cognizers and inferential valid cognizers. Okay, so how can we have an incontrovertible consciousness? One that an incontrovertible means has realized the object, eliminated all doubts and superimpositions about it, and has gotten to it correctly. You can have direct valid cognizers, generally associated with the sense power, with the senses. A direct valid cognizer is one that has, like my eye consciousness example before, that is looking at the tree outside. The first instant of that would be a direct valid cognizer, and the subsequent moments, the subsequent cognizers, subsequent cognition in the train, the cars that are following that, so to speak, those would still realize the object, but they wouldn't necessarily be valid according to Sartre because they're not new. They're incontrovertible, but they're not new. An inferential valid cognizer is one which has realized something like, say, for instance, subtle impermanence, or well, you can even have other things. Say, for instance, on a you can have an inferential cognizer that realizes, for instance, on a lake at night, the cloudy vision ahead of you is not fire, because in general, fire on the lake is not generally observable. And if you see some fog, you can infer that it is, or you see some cloudy-like appearance in front of you, you can infer it is clouds, because even if a boat was on fire, you would see the fire at night. Okay, there are different kinds of inferential cognitions. You can also have an inferential cognition like a yogic direct perception of selflessness or subtle impermanence, which is incontrovertible, which is, even though it's dealing with a mental image, it can still get at the meaning of that. We'll talk more about that in the coming section. So there are two types of valid cognizers: direct valid cognizers and inferential valid cognizers. The definition of a direct perceiver, now we're not using the word valid cognizer any longer. The definition of a direct perceiver is a non-mistaken knower free from conceptuality. So what does this mean? This is one way that you might be able to divide the pizza of consciousness from the beginning: direct perceivers and conceptual perceivers. Okay, conceptual perception, conceptual mind. So direct perceivers are free from conceptuality. They no longer depend on a mental image to know the object, like the sense powers. They do accept some mental consciousnesses as being direct perceivers, but not many. It is incontrovertible in that it has realized its object, eliminating any kind of discordant factors, any kind of superimpositions and so forth, like, say, eye consciousness. Eye consciousness is a direct perceiver, nose consciousness, ear consciousness, and so forth. There are four types of direct valid, and then it says the definition of direct valid cognizer is a new incontrovertible knower free from conceptuality. So we had direct perceiver is non-mistaken knower free from conceptuality. So it's not mistaken with respect to its appearing object, right? That's different. That non-mistaken here means different than incontrovertible. The definition of a direct valid cognizer is a new incontrovertible knower free from conceptuality. You might say, why doesn't it say a new non-mistaken incontrovertible knower free from conceptuality? We'll talk about that next time. I just want to introduce these couple of terms now. We'll go into these more details next time. Yeah. So, where was I? Yeah. So there are 4 types of direct valid cognizers. Self-knowing, remember we talked about self-knowers, Sautrantika. Some Sautrantikas accept the existence of self-knowers. Most of them do. Self-knowing awareness. The Vaibhashikas, remember, don't accept self-knowers, and the Prasangika don't accept self-knowers. The followers of scripture, the Sautrantikas followers of scripture may not accept self-knowers. Remember what self-knowing is? It's an element of any consciousness that is knowing the existence of the consciousness at that time. It's pointed inward. It's not looking at the object of the consciousness. Like I consciousness is called an other knower, but within I consciousness, there is a self-knower that's of the same substance, the same entity, which is, you might say, pointed inward. It's not looking outward. Instead of an other knower, it's a self-knower, self-cognizer, and it is simply knowing the existence of that consciousness. So there's self-knowing valid cognizers, direct valid cognizers, sense direct valid cognizers, like the I sense, mental direct valid cognizers. There's some examples of that. And yogic direct valid cognizers, like this is a particular kind of mental consciousness that's based on a union of tranquil abiding and penetrative insight, shamatha and vipassana, that is able to analyze, eliminate all of the discordant factors, come to a realization. So let me end there for today and ask if you have any questions. Stephen has a question.
Thank you for taking my question, Venerable George.
My pleasure.
So I'm a little bit confused. In particular, what I'm confused about is the difference between here, assumption and inference. So we say an invalid cognizer includes someone making a correct assumption. I think that's what you said.
Right.
But to me, that sounds a lot like inference. So could you perhaps illuminate me a little bit?
Eliminate you or illuminate you?
Well, I
don't want to eliminate
hopefully you. Illuminate. Maybe enlighten would be a better
right.
request.
So among conceptual minds, our mental consciousness is what's doing all our thinking. We don't think with our sense consciousnesses. I mentioned before, if you see a pretty girl on the street or a handsome boy, it's not that your eye consciousness develops attachment for them or desire for them. All of the delusions, all of the afflictions take place in the mental consciousness. The mental consciousness deals with mental images. It knows or thinks it knows something by means of a mental object, mental image. So you may, if you're talking about reincarnation, that's the referent object, and you have a mental image of reincarnation to your mind, which you're through which you are kind of knowing or thinking about about reincarnation. That mental image itself may or may not be factually concordant. It may be a complete, like some of these Hollywood people who write books about reincarnation, and they state that they were Queen Nefertiti in the past or something like that, all sorts of things. They have a mental image of reincarnation which may or may probably not factually concordant. So if they happen to have a mental image which is more or less correct, they're knowing reincarnation by means of that that would be, and they would say they believe, yeah, they're thinking they know reincarnation, that they've realized it. They haven't actually realized it. They may not have, it may be tending toward the correct understanding of reincarnation, or it maybe not be factually concordant, their mental image, but they believe it. They think that that is true. And that kind of mind is called a correct belief or correct assumption because they believe it. There are other kinds of, that's called a belief that's tending in a correct assumption that's tending in the right direction. There are kinds of, well, we're talking about doubts when I use that term, sorry. So inference is different than that. Inference is a state of mind, inferential cognition, that is based on using reasoning to develop the mental image. And if it is an inferential cognizer, it is one that has eliminated the superimpositions and has gotten at the object correctly. So that is, so you might start off with a correct belief, and by investigating that over time, it could turn into an inferential cognizer if you used correct reasoning to, for instance, to prove the existence of the selflessness of the person. So an inferential cognizer would be like the end result of having started off with correct belief and then gone beyond assumption or belief and actually realized the object, then it would be called an inferential cognizer. Does that help?
It does. So just so I can say it back and hopefully get it right.
Yeah.
So the assumption may be or may not be correct. That's where it stands. But the inference relies on a chain of reasoning, maybe syllogism or something like that, that one can perhaps communicate to someone else rather than just saying, in a past life, I was Queen Nefertiti, and
Right.
there you go.
Right. I think that's correct.
Thank you.
A belief could be wrong, but here when it's talking about correct belief, that means a belief that happens to be correct. And so most of our understanding of, our belief in reincarnation may not be inferential at all. It may be based just on correct belief. So that can encourage us to delve into the reasoning that would, quote, validate reincarnation. There's actual logical reasonings. I remember Serkon Rinpoche, Serkon Senchab Rinpoche, one of the debating partners of the Dalai Lama, used to say, oh, there are all of these logical reasonings to prove reincarnation that you can find in the Pramana literature. For instance, starting with the fact that the mind is clear in knowing, and to prove, what am I talking about? Reincarnation, right? So you can prove that every moment of consciousness has a succeeding moment of consciousness and had a previous moment of consciousness, and the first moment of consciousness in the fertilized egg, embryo, or whatever you call it, fertilized egg in the womb, the first instant had a previous instant of consciousness, and that had to, different things like this that depend on making certain actual observations, realizing the clear light nature of the mind, and that one moment of mind follows another, and also using reasoning and so forth. So, but Serkon Rinpoche said that even for him, those reasonings didn't really move his mind. He said, I knew the 13th Dalai Lama, and when the 14th Dalai Lama, who's still alive now, the present Dalai Lama is called the 14th Dalai Lama, when I saw him, I knew that was the same one. A little bit, my experience with Lama Osel I knew Lama Yeshe quite well for a Westerner. There maybe some of his Tibetan peers, his relatives and so forth, knew him much better than I. But when I met Lama Osel, I knew this is, like, say, for instance, once when we were at Institute of Lama Tsongkhapa, Lama Osel was maybe 3.5 or something like this. He was on a tricycle anyway, tiny tricycle, riding around, zooming outside. And well, I have to preface it first. When I left Kopan to go to Manjushri Institute at Lama's request to be the spiritual coordinator there, maybe in 88 or something, no, 76. I went to Lama's room. I took off my chugu. I made 3 prostrations, and I asked Lama, was there any instruction, any advice that he would give for me going to Manjushri Institute to study in the Geshe program? And Lama thought for a minute, and he said, "Intellectual Mount Meru isn't worth caca. It isn't worth shit," more coarsely. So, really the essence of the study is not to get caught up in the intellectual nature of things and feel pride and so forth, but to use that knowledge to become, to eliminate one's faults, to develop one's qualities and so forth, not to use it as intellectual, an object of pride at the cocktail party to say various things that this or that. So when I saw Lama Osel many years later, after Lama had passed away, and he was a little 3.5-year-old boy, something like that, I caught him making one turn. I said, "Lama, do you have anything to tell me?" And he said, "I don't know anything about caca." So that was kind of like a shared moment, like playing on some common experience that we'd had in the past. And many people who've known reincarnations have that kind of things, like shared memories between lives. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. I don't know if there was more. Anyone else have a question before we go? Donna or Doris, ready?
Thank you, Venerable. Just wondering the difference between non-mistaken and
Incontrovertible. Right. So again, they sometimes might sound like they're the same thing. Non-mistaken or mistaken means mistaking the appearing object. So what's the difference? The appearing object of perception, let's say eye consciousness, is the actual object. That's what is appearing, even though we would say it's the aspect of that object, the image of that object on your retina that you're perceiving. We still say that's the appearing object. The appearing object of conception is the mental image. Like the example I gave before, you're knowing the object, like putting on those glasses. You're knowing the Eiffel Tower by looking through an image. Your eye is not focused on that little colored image in the rotating disc. Your eye is actually focused. It's appearing that the Eiffel Tower is out there somewhere, right? In the stereo little vision thing. So you're knowing it by way of the mental image. The mental image is not the actual thing that your mental consciousness is focused on. It's actually, it's called the appearing object, and you think it's the object that you're engaging with, the Eiffel Tower. So it is a conceptual mind is mistaken with respect to its appearing object. You might think that the Eiffel Tower is appearing, but actually what's appearing is the mental image. You're not actually focusing on the mental image. You're not actually seeing the mental image. You're seeing through the mental image. You're knowing the Eiffel Tower by means of the mental image of the Eiffel Tower. When you talk about incontrovertible or controvertible or deceived or undeceived, that means when we're talking about, say, correct assumption, for instance, you haven't really, you're although you might believe, or you had a correct belief or correct assumption, you might believe that you understand reincarnation, but you have not eliminated all of the doubts and misinterpretations of it. When you do, through correct reasoning, realize that, you'd have an incontrovertible knower. Incontrovertible means having eliminated all the superimpositions about the object that you're engaging with. So there's here this terminology. There are various kinds of objects with respect to a consciousness. There's the appearing object. The appearing object of I consciousness is the object. The appearing object of conception is the mental image. The engaged object is the object that you're actually engaging with or trying to know. In the case of I consciousness, they're one and the same. The appearing object and the engaged object are the same. For mental consciousness or conceptual consciousness, the appearing object is the mental image. The engaged object is, let's say, the Eiffel Tower or your mother's face or something like that. There are other kinds of objects that are posited also for minds. We'll talk, when we talk about selflessness later, the referent object, the object that you're referring to. Okay, so let me, although that may not have cleared up that for you, let's leave that question for the time being. Anyone else have a question before we end? Okay. So anyway, Bob will be able to ask those things that you might feel, I don't want to ask in front of George. I'll ask in front of Bob. You can ask the question and answer afterwards. So let's dedicate, as we made a motivation at the beginning, let's dedicate the merits that we created at the beginning. Calm your mind and try to recognize that during this period, we have created some virtuous karma this morning. You can also include all the virtuous karma you've ever created in the past and the virtuous karma that you will create in the future, and dedicate that. What that means is make a decision, a sort of a strong wish that it ripen in a particular way that can help to guide that karma ripening in the future. Due to the merits I've created this morning, in the past, and the future, may they ripen in such a way that they enhance my spiritual development, not simply experienced as a superficial pleasure that is experienced once and has no great meaning, but may it sustain my spiritual development from week by week, week to week, year to year, life to life, up to and including the development of bodhicitta, renunciation, wisdom realizing emptiness, all of the realizations of the bodhisattva path, up to and including the realization of omniscience, Buddhahood, from which state I can effortlessly and spontaneously lead sentient beings out of suffering into that very same state of omniscience. All as a result of these merits, that are dedicating them, wishing that they would ripen in that way. whatever words are used, that's the meaning of dedication. So may the supreme jewel or precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has not arisen, that which already exists, is not that has arisen, may it not diminish, but increase more and more. And long life prayers, usually in formal settings, long life prayers are said before the dedication, because we're not dedicating the merits for this, but we're praying. The wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, the source of every single benefit and happiness in the world, to the incomparable, kind Tenzin Gyatso, 14th Dalai Lama, I beseech, may all your wishes, your holy wishes, be spontaneously fulfilled. And prayer for the long life of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then for Lama Oso, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. So thank you for chewing these dry bones. Remember the clear light nature of your mind, becoming familiar with this. The next time you experience, come across these subjects and people have the same questions you have now that are maybe will be resolved by the end of this course, you'll say, oh, yeah, that's easy. You can realize that. So anyway, thank you so much and see you next week.